So, I'm a software developer and I have been noticing this kind of stuff on some of these sites, and I'm sure a lot of people have, especially any site that's like socially. That's what GitHub is if you're not familiar with it. It's kind of like a social site for people to share code that they're working on publicly. And they have this whole register to vote banner across the top of their site when you go to, I'm pretty sure any one of the pages. I'm at the main site here, and then if you can see one of the things that's favoring blue above red here, which is like, oh yeah, sure, just innocently, probably just a coincidence, right? And with their pentagram, of course. It's supposed to be red, white, and blue. Yeah, right. And then right here you get it, and it's like, oh, now it's favoring red above a mostly blue background, and this looks, what's the first thing you think of when you look at that star in that box? I thought of China, which seems totally appropriate. Register to vote and volunteer to make an impact during the U.S. 2020 elections. So I start carefully combing through here, like, oh, what's this? Some social justice warrior in here? Maybe gonna, but it was all neutral. I read this whole thing, it was pretty neutral, and I decided, well, I'm gonna keep digging. And it's basically talking about how there's not enough poll workers because of the pandemic, and that most of the people are over the age 60. More than half the people are over the age 60 that normally go out and canvass, I guess, to make sure people are ready to vote or something, supposedly. Um, and then where is it? Find more information about becoming a poll worker ready to vote in the U.S. 2020 elections. So I clicked on this one. I clicked on all of them, I think. And then they go through a bunch of things. It still seems pretty neutral, I would say. Until you get down here. Where is it? Well, for one thing, they have these other things down here that I don't like. That on the last time I came through here, some of them were like talking about this fund they donate to, and I'm like, oh, that's not exactly neutral, Like they should just forego that if they really care. They shouldn't be trying to drive traffic to other areas of their site that might contain, obviously, left-slanted bias. Now I can't remember where it is. Request a mail-in ballot. Planning ahead. So it's Vox. If you're a regular voter, it's worth reading Planning Ahead. So if you click on that link, it will take you to this early voting here. I'll just do it so you don't have to take my word for it. Planning Ahead. And then you get in here and you're like, Vox? Now we're in like, some kind of mag rag site. And it's obviously, this is journalism now. It's definitely not like non-biased. And of course you come down here and it's got the guy doing the COVID cleanup because there's all these germs are just everywhere waiting to kill you. And then you come down here on the sidebar and it's freaking all anti-Trump propaganda down the right. Trump's weekend rallies show just how unhinged his campaign is. It's like, well, okay, shouldn't there be something like the future of the Senate may come down to Susan Collins? Okay, is there anything, that's positive Trump or maybe negative Biden, something to balance the playfield over here? The Republican Party is an authoritarian outlier. Really? Minority rule in America. It affects virtually nobody. Trump erases coronavirus victims as death toll hits 200,000. 200,000. And the thing is, that death toll, we know that's BS. For one thing, all these sites round it up. Don't take my word for any of this, but all these sites are rounding that number up. Whenever you hear the figure, they always round it up. So it's like, well, then as it approaches 200,000, right? So they're saying what it's going to be in a month, or a month ago they were saying what it is now. You know what I mean? It's just they always round it up, which is just freaking ridiculous. And the other thing is none of the people who are rounding this number up ever mention the the average comorbidity rate or anything like that, which the CDC itself has published the figures on. It's an average comorbidity of 2.5. And in all honesty, if you want to round up, 2.5 rounds up to 3. So 3 comorbidity rate means that the people have 3 things that seriously affect their health, probably terminal. Don't take my word for any of this. Look it up for yourself, like I said. Things that could go on, that could have been cofactors or primary causes in their death. So, and sometimes those comorbidities are things like a fatal auto accident. You know what I mean? In all honesty. And it's like, okay, this person got in a wreck and died in a vehicle. Well, their excuse is now when they say, why is COVID listed as a cause of death? Or, as one of the potential causes of death on the birth certificate in whatever order, and they say, oh, well, we don't know that COVID didn't cause that accident. That's what it really says. It really says that that's a comorbidity on their death certificate, and that's the excuse, the narrative excuse that happens with that. It's happened with automobile, standard car accidents. I've heard that in the case of a motorcycle accident. It is just ridiculous. And so it's basically, if they can write it off as COVID related, a lot of places are. It's not happening everywhere. In Oregon, as far as I know, I haven't checked the numbers in a while, but we were just at a few hundred. This whole pandemic, whatever you want to call it, we've only been at a few hundred fatalities to do with COVID. So I would have to say that maybe Oregon's doing a little more honest counting, because it might seem like it's some podunk place in the woods or something, but it's not exactly. There's towns and big cities, Portland's in Oregon, like things like that, and it's just like, really only a few hundred deaths. And then I've spent a lot of time, like I said, probably going on close to 2 months ago, plus or minus, digging through like what kind of people are passing away from COVID. The vast majority, I would say at least 9 out of 10, and that's rounding down probably, are elderly people, definitely above 65, the vast majority, and they all had underlying conditions. Not every single one, but all the old people, all the people, I would say for sure above 70 that I found, and I didn't do an exhaustive search, but I've probably searched through, I don't know, 50 to 100 cases maybe, and those people, even though they were often approaching or elderly, they had underlying conditions as well, So and to find people that were, everybody that I found that was like below 65, I think they were all like above 45, and there were just so very few that I found that were even that low of a range, and they all had, to my recollection, they all had underlying causes, and virtually all the old people did too. So it's just like, it's crazy, that it's like, okay, yeah, I look at it like, whatever. I don't even want to say what I look at it like. I think you can take a guess at what I look at it like. And of course, everybody's life matters. It's not like, oh, these people are old and whoop-de-whoop, because if somebody wants to get into the conspiracy end of the spectrum, or I don't know if that's even the right word. I don't want to say conspiracy. I want to say, hidden agendas or public agendas, whatever you want to call it. There are people that, a lot of these people are eugenicists that are on one side. And I won't say which side that is. I'll let you take a guess. And the first people they want to target are the elderly and the homeless. And if you look at who's most affected by this whole pandemic thing, or like I said, whatever you want to call it, it was planned. I mean, you don't have to say it was a conspiracy to say it was planned. Look at Event 201. Okay, that was coronavirus pandemic planning. 1 month, exactly 1 month before the first reported case. Okay, coincidence? Fine. the whole last year has been packed with nonstop coincidences. So it's like I call it the pandemic, and I don't feel like I'm making any false accusation or anything or conspiracy theory or nothing like that because it was planned. So what are you gonna do? It's freaking ridiculous to think otherwise. But yeah, it's just I don't know. I get disgusted by this. It's like these the tech giants are have become an oligarchy, and a technocracy in one. And if you look up either one of those terms, they're both disgusting, in my opinion. So now we have this like techno oligarchy that is trying to control us just out of nowhere too. I thought in the future, I mean, just towards the beginning of 2020, I was thinking like, in the future I could picture like Amazon or places like that becoming so big they're almost like their own powerful country and stuff. And now it's just like it was almost overnight virtually that all of a sudden it's like, wow, they are. And they were right on the cusp of that. And I wasn't even realizing it. I was thinking like, oh, this is so many years out in the future. But we're there. And now the thing is that all these people are leaning towards the so-called hard left. And I don't even think it's a matter of like, oh, I hold leftist values or right-wing values or anything like that anymore. It's just because I've always identified with a particular side, and now I don't identify with that particular side because I've come to find out like what, like, oh, these are the people that by identifying with that side that I'm associated with now. You know what I mean? Like F to the no on that because there's just you got to be kidding me. So when I come in and see this stuff, it's like when I look up what's going on, I mean, politicians are politicians, right? And Trump's not a lifelong politician. He's not a career politician. So take note there, right? I think it's only fair that if they're going to pump this stuff down, that I get a little word out edgewise on some of this stuff. I'm not trying to really defend nobody to any extreme, or no, not trying to defend anybody to any extreme, however you want to say it. But what I'm saying is that if you dig in and look at this guy, the establishment, the so-called establishment, what he calls deep state, fake news, all that kind of stuff, they have a lot of reasons to hate him, right? And they're turning around and manipulating the masses with this stupid crap, hanging on every little thing, every little note they can to try and, just like he says, it affects virtually nobody. Is he not allowed to make that claim? Because when you dissect those numbers, we all know, anybody who's done data, any kind of real data science knows there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? You can manipulate statistics to whatever degree you want. You can make a million seem like a lot. You can make a million seem like nothing. It's ridiculous. And this 200,000 number is the most hyperinflated number they can come up with for the most part, right? And by they, I mean the people who want the numbers high. For the most part, like I said, using Oregon as an example, that I don't think that everywhere's inflating the numbers, but I even have to think that even Oregon has, even at a few hundred. And so that should say something right there. I've heard anywhere from like 6 to 16%, or excuse me, is that the right mathematical factor to use? That they're inflated, the numbers are inflated by a factor of 10 to 16 or 6 to 16, I think it was. And then 10's sort of the median in there, of people. So if you say, okay, let's pick the median value of a 10x inflated number rate, right? So let's round it up like they're doing, 200,000 people, divide that by the 10x inflation factor, and you're down to 20,000 people. You're down to 20,000 people in arguably close to a year because, 3/4 of a year basically. Because there was a lot of flights going to China before they locked down the borders, and to act like, oh, there was just, all of a sudden it's supposedly becoming a pandemic in these other countries, but it coincidentally, during the winter, a cold, that's why it's called a cold to my knowledge, is because it spreads in the cooler air. So if you think that things are not going to get crazy here as the temperatures start dropping, and I don't mean realistically, maybe somewhat for the truly vulnerable populations, those numbers I'm sure will realistically go up some. But as far as the manipulation and the power grabs and all this stuff, you know, what they're doing, they're going to step it up, guaranteed, once this cold weather hits, because that look what they did during the summer when these things go dormant. You know what I mean? They go virtually dormant, and people shouldn't have been wearing these masks. Honestly, that's the science I'm seeing. I'm not saying that it's wrong for somebody to be wearing a mask if that's what you choose to do, as your freedom to choose, do your research and choose what you feel safe, and listen to the medical experts that you feel are, you know, that you trust. Then that's cool. That's what you do. You know, this is America. This is a free country. And until they make that law, you know, a lot of these governors are, pretty much all of them that are enforcing these lockdowns, are overstepping their bounds. You know, they have a limitation on their executive power. And by continuing to do all this lockdown stuff, where's the state legislators? They're supposed to hand this off to legislative bodies that are multiple people, not one person on one side of a political aisle, you know, that's getting paid by like BLM and stuff. BLM is completely admitted left-wing Marxists. Don't take my word for it. Look them up. They fund the Democrats. They pump them full of money. You know, I mean, just go chase the paper trails. They're endless for all that stuff. And it's like, no wonder they're enforcing these lockdowns and telling people, go protest, riot, whatever you want to call it. You know, they call it protesting, of course, and a lot of people are peaceful protesters. But I feel like, you know, I can't even go protest, because then all of a sudden I'm taking a political side. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm a quote unquote leftist now because I'm out protesting because I care about somebody's life. You know what I mean? And that's just BS. Look at what they're doing to Trump supporters that go anywhere near those protests and stuff. And now everything's just polarized just ridiculously. But this guy is anti-establishment. That's why they hate his guts. He's a businessman. He's a very successful businessman. People bring up like, oh, he can't even run a casino in Vegas. Well, guess what? If it's so easy, why don't you go run a casino in Vegas? You know what I mean? It's all profit, right? And the reason is probably, I would have to assume, is because he didn't get in bed with the mafia like everybody else did that has a successful casino there. So he probably just bowed out. You know, if you can show me some evidence to the contrary, I'd love to see it on any of this stuff. And what has he done? He's gone and had huge success in other places with much more legitimate business operations. And he's a billionaire. He's not a super uber billionaire. He's just over the billionaire threshold, but it would take your entire lifetime to count all the money he has. You know, he's basically, if you would have wanted to vote for Ross Perot in the 90s, you know what I mean? That's what Trump is today, to some degree. He's Ross Perot and more. So he's doing all this stuff that I thought I was an idiot when I was a kid, walking around with my Made in the USA t-shirt and all that, thinking that like, yeah, recycle and, you know, change the world, we can make it a better place, vote for Ross Perot, the third party candidate. Trump is that third party candidate running on the Republican ticket. Just like how people think of Bernie as being that third party candidate who ran on the Democrat ticket. BS. Bernie's establishment. He pretends not to be establishment. I can't believe how many people are suckered into that crap with him. So like I said, this is my opinion. You know, feel free to give me any evidence to the contrary. But Bernie's right there in the Senate or House or whatever he is. I don't even remember anymore. And is just pushing the same old crap with all the left-wingers. You know what I mean? You can't even tell the difference between a Democrat and Bernie. He's right there pushing their establishment agenda, that whole thing. Oh, we gotta wear masks on the plane. That's the first thing we need to do. Yeah, it is, right? Why don't you go to China or Africa, dude? Why don't you go to one of those countries? We got a whole world. That's the thing with globalism. You know, globalism I don't think should be tear down the borders and make everybody one gender population or something like what it looks like it's trying to go for. And we all know we've been seeing this creep in the background. You know, I was on social media. I befriended somebody who was non-binary and all that and sat there and defended him against all these conservative people and all this stuff. And they turned on me. They turned on me after we were getting along better than two peas in a pod. They turned on me because they were going and sitting there at their little church of this racist, sorry to say, black woman who was pumping a bunch of race. You know, it's just an old black lady that was racist against white people. Whatever, she's entitled to her opinion. I don't care if she's racist, honestly. You know what I mean? But if she's spouting that stuff publicly and I have the ability to make a public comment, I'll make one. And she was saying that white people can't do this and that and da da da. And I said, well, it's not okay for the white people to do these certain things and stuff. And I said, well, is it okay for a non-racist, to point out that a racist person is making racist comments? And I just left it at that, a little bit like short and to the point and witty or whatever, of like, hey, check yourself. You know what I mean? Like, it sort of a hypocrite here, and I started following her. I didn't follow her on purpose. At first it was initially coming through my feed because I was befriended with the person who was non-binary, and they noticed that, okay, it's pretty easy to deduce some of that stuff, especially on these social networks that are just stupid algorithms. As far as like we're concerned, but when it gets down to the stuff they care about, their algorithms are tight, huh? But this person, my non-binary friend was like, hey, you need to back off and let this person preach their stuff and everything. And I was like, well, I don't see what the big deal is if, we're not allowed to provide contrary evidence in like a peaceful manner, like I can't say like I disagree. You know what I mean? Like, really? Like, what kind of forum is that when I have to just sit there and take it? Like, I don't do that with anybody. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's the president or, anybody. Like, whether it's somebody I agree or disagree with, for the most part, it's like the whole beauty of everything in the world is to be able to question it, Like, even the Bible says, question everything in it. So, like, the Bible alone says that. It says to doubt it, to basically to look for two or more witnesses and stuff like that. So even that alone, so everything else from there should be questioned. Everything else from there is man-made, right? And when I say man, I mean human-made. Um, so anyway, what happened was that non-binary friend of mine disconnected and blocked me on the network. And I was like, wow, really? They were like, if it comes down to it, this is it for us. And I was like, no freaking way. We had established a really great online relationship, I would say, not any sort of like a, bizarre sexual relationship kind of thing or anything like that, but just a friendship kind of a relationship. And I felt like we empowered each other because we were both sort of outcasts on that particular social network. We were both people who didn't fit the mold, but together we were able to create this synergy that was very powerful. I felt like, I enjoyed it. And so I was just like, wow, all that down the tubes over the fact that I just questioned this person who, why don't you go write a thing to LinkedIn, or, well, I guess you know what social network it was now. Go write a thing to that network and tell them. I was thinking in my head, like, they're the one who's pushing the algorithms on me, and then they see, when they have the ability to tell if something's like a neutral or negative or positive comment or whatever, that you can see their artificial intelligence crap just bubbling over all the time. And they don't do that. I've ran into that situation a lot of times, and I'm like, wow, why do they keep pushing this on me? It's like they want to get a reaction. They want to trigger people. So, like I said, my non-binary friend blocked me, but yet I continued to follow the person, the lady that had been making some racist comments, and I continued to comment as I felt appropriate. I wasn't trying to be like a stalker or anything. I was just like watching stuff come through. Well, next thing you know, a little short time later, she said a few things I liked. So I clicked like on those things. You know what I mean? And I think I don't remember now, it's been over a year. But I think she may have even clicked like on a couple of my comments, And by the time that whole thing, I'm sure that she probably faded off in the algorithm at some point, or whatever. I just stopped noticing even provoking, like, triggering kind of comments from her after a while, So it's like, I have to wonder if maybe we got through to each other on a human connection, and maybe we met each other halfway on something and helped each other with that or whatever, I felt good about my relationship with that lady at that, which was very, very just touch and go, not anything like, I don't remember direct messaging her or anything like that. But it turned out to be a positive experience, I felt like, overall. But the person my non-binary friend never came back around, and I was right there. Um, didn't really ever make any negative comments. I did do one post the next day that was just sort of like, it was a meme that I had downloaded, not a meme that was like way over the top or anything, but I had like a folder. I would post memes and stuff occasionally, and this was a meme that was just waiting in my little cache of memes to post, that I was eventually just going to post for no reason, just to post it, not even direct it at anybody or anything. And I thought, you know what? How appropriate, this basically, I could have just, if none of that would have ever gone down, I could have ended up posting that meme anyway, just for the sake of it. But I thought, if somebody did try and apply that to that situation, then it could apply, to that whole fizzling of our online synergy fizzling out. Um, so I mean, somebody could, and if they were in a bad mood or whatever and took it wrong, they could have taken that wrong. But it wasn't anything that was like directly like, over the top or anything. It was kind of like one of those motivational poster memes, but the parody of the motivational poster, but not like the not the way over the top parody thing, if that makes sense. It was like a flower planted in the middle of the road, and it said something like I can't remember what it said. I'll ruin it if I try and say it, but it was something about like the difference between like a budding genius and a blooming idiot is where you choose to make your stand or something like that. And it was a flower poking out of the middle of the road right at that dotted line, on like a highway or something. And so I thought it was kind of like gracefully elegant on one hand, and that was something that, like I said, I had some of those kind of those mock motivational posters like that I've been posting anyway on a regular basis. So that was like the closest thing I did to anything that could be taken negative. I thought, you know what, that is appropriate, so I'm going to make sure and post that one the next day and everything about, I felt totally solid about that. But anyway, that was all, I guess, just over defending myself and the way I felt about them. But I feel like all this it's the real stuff that needs to happen. Those real communications are being drowned out a lot of times, And even if they aren't completely drowned out, like how I was able to get through to the person that I would now describe as maybe formerly racist or whatever, that I previously had an issue with some of the things they were saying, then I felt good with them, And if my non-binary friend would have just let that play out, then we could all be friends right now, and everything could keep going. But they picked the like NPC SJW card and ran that direction. You know what I mean? It's like they ditched me in the freaking highway, I felt like, because who would do that for a friend? You know what I mean? This is somebody who I felt like was like a battle buddy, because we've been through so much stuff online to where it's like somebody might be taking jabs at them for being non-binary or whatever, and I would step in and start just throwing the best of my wit at those people, Oh yeah, what about this? What about this? And just get those people, knock them back from that whole thing. You know what I mean? Because it's like, hey, no matter what, it's like we're all humans. Let's give each other a chance. If somebody wants to identify as whatever, they can, in my opinion. But now it's to the point where, it's just like what they do to build up people to be racist against each other, where they just take everything over the top and they try and make it like, oh, white people are bad, like white people are the cause of all these problems, and then the white people start seeing it as like, oh, now you're being pitted against like these minority groups because, like even transgender people or whatever, they're having them come in and take their jobs and whatever, and that doesn't mean that all transgender people are bad by any means, and especially the further back you go with transgenderism and stuff like that, it's like a lot of those people, from what I've seen, are a lot cooler than now that it's like a trend. And now you've got people who are transgender who aren't even truly transgender, at least not in the traditional sense, I think we all obviously cross spectrums of like our gender identities. I don't think I need to wear a bra just because, you know, I can show effeminate qualities to like an animal or a small child or something like that. I still feel like I'm a man. Like that's just one regard. Like some ways I'm not. I'm cold, cold as a man is supposedly, stuff like that. But it's like we all, if you nitpick everybody apart, we have qualities that cross those gender thresholds, but we're probably mostly leaning towards one gender. Most of us, not everybody. But that's how I feel comfortable personally anyway, so I identify as a man. I don't feel like there's a woman trapped in me, but I do feel like I have effeminate qualities in there, and I feel like I have a soft side. And it sucks because like if I'm in a situation where I have to like go to court for something or whatever it is where society can throw the man card at me and be like, "You're a man, you don't care about children, this and that kind of stuff," then I feel like that's happened to me in a lot of situations. That's just sort of, I can't break them apart right now what the situations were, but I've been there where it's like, "Oh no, you're a dude." You know what I mean? It's like, "Oh, now I'm a dude, huh?" Like with all this whole thing about like trying to break down the whole gender stereotypes and all that. Supposedly, I don't think it's breaking down gender stereotypes. I think it's really upholding them and making it so that people don't want to identify as any particular, they want to be non-binary so that they don't have to feel like they're forced over to a gender stereotype or something. But anyway, this is back to the whole point of why I started ranting. Sorry about that. Thanks for listening. This is ridiculous. You know what I mean? They shouldn't shovel people off to this left-wing site. And we know what you're doing, GitHub. We totally know what you're doing. You know what I mean? Want to do it early? You already gave us all the information. There's no reason we need this left-wing Vox site to tell us how to do it. And it's a crack up. One of the things these people do too is they think that the left wing, the best thing they can do is rock the vote and get more people to sign up, especially these technocracy oligarchy sites like the social sites, because they've tried to turn themselves into left-wing, so-called left-wing echo chambers and stuff. But they may be in for a surprise because it has happened before where they tried to rock that vote and it went red, so we'll see about that. And here's another one of those sites. This is some technology I've been into lately. It's back-end server technology that powers a lot of web servers and stuff like that. And right here across the top of their site, they have this Black Lives Matter thing. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, Black lives definitely matter, but when you say quote unquote BLACKLIVESMATTR hashtag one word like that, you're supporting a political organization that some people would argue use black people as human shields. So, you know what I mean? Why does it have to be spelt exactly like that? Why can't you say everybody matters, especially black people? Or African American people matter, or Hamitic people matter. Why is it Black Lives Matter? That's a political organization. That is a specific .org political organization that takes .money from you, .donations, whatever. I'm being dumb, but they take donations, you know what I mean? And they turn around and decide what that money's going to go to. So they are really big and really good at making sure that people only say this and pumping stuff into their puppets to get really pissed off if you say it any other way, because they don't want you to accidentally give your money to another organization. And they want to keep pumping up this one particular organization that I know a lot of black people, a ton of black people, are against this organization. You know what I mean? And because they don't like it, it's trying to be a one size fits all and all this stuff. So here's this place that shouldn't even be taking a political stance either way. You know what I mean? Yeah, if they want to put something original, not like a .org.com kind of thing, like pit, black people matter. Just say people instead of lives. Is that so hard? Because you start saying lives and then people have questions like, well, does that mean all black lives or just some black lives? Because all black lives would mean the 53% of aborted black babies. There's that argument, and nobody has any response to that. I've seen people go out in public and bring that up, to all these white SJWs and stuff, and nobody can say it because, they're straight ticket on everything. They're going with the agendas, and they just, it's like whatever. And you scroll down this page, and they have a bunch of people that were supposedly murdered in the last 10 years by police, and I could believe that there's that many wrongful deaths of I don't know for sure what all these names are. I heard that guy is I don't know, maybe I'm confusing him with somebody else. Okay, yeah, I'm confusing him with somebody else. Was this the guy who turned around and shot at the police? While jogging. I don't know his story, so I don't want to speak on that. I just recognize the name, I guess, from the media. But I would say, I could believe that there's that many people that over the last decade that have been wrongfully killed by police, for sure. And I believe that there's a list of a lot of different colored people too that have been wrongfully had their lives taken while in police custody. So it's not just black people. And the problem is, and I think it's most especially in the United States, it's so weird that this is a global thing because I don't see this exact type of racism globally. I mean, of course, I've only see what the TV wants to show me for the most part, but the in the United States, we obviously have it. You could literally try and cookie cut it into a black-white situation, and it's almost possible to do that because, I mean, it is largely possible to do that because of slavery. It was very distinct that a huge amount of the population was white, or yeah, we could just say white. I mean, obviously it's a melting pot in the U.S., right? But initially there was a huge amount of the population was white, and then a lot of black people, people of Hamitic descent from Africa, were sold to America by other black people, and specifically those kente cloths that the Senate people were wearing when they took the knee, supposedly over the George Floyd thing. They were wearing the cloths of those slave traders that sold the black people to the United States. Look it up for yourself. And so obviously we know the story, right? So we had this human industrial labor that was on the backs of humans being treated like mules, and maybe even worse than mules. And it was disgusting, so that happened for generations. And that created a different class of people. Not that they're inferior, but they were treated as such. And it was easy to distinguish those people a lot of times because not all black people were put into that situation, but a lot of them were. I would say probably the vast majority, right? And so you could tell, like you could see those people. And then for 100 years after slavery ended, there was still strong oppression. There was, oppression on the books in legislation against black people. And oh man, it's freaking ridiculous. So it was like, that's one of those things where I feel like we were pitted against each other, the races were pit against each other. So where was I going with that? It's just like such a disgusting thought. I'm not trying to say that like there hasn't been this horrible stuff happen to a lot of black people in America, but it didn't happen so much exactly like that in other places. I mean, I know there was a lot of slavery. There's been a lot of slavery with a lot of races. But what happened in America was one of the last massive, at least to my knowledge, because I'm schooled in American, public schools in the last part of the last century. We were one of the last major forms of slavery of a Western civilization, and it was mostly black people. So that looks really bad, right? And it is. But there was lots of slavery before then. It was just such a regular thing before then. And, it still goes on to whatever degree. And then people argue class and wage slavery, but obviously a lot of that, especially in America, doesn't even come close to what the black slaves went through. That was rugged, that was bullshit. And there's a lot of people who still hold those views, and I think what I was getting at was the country was able to establish itself. If there's any sort of privilege that seems like it's black and white, there was that form of a white privilege, you could say. Like a lot of the police back then and everything were mostly predominantly white and stuff like that. So that's just the way the cookie was cut. But the way to fix that is to shift things, and not necessarily look at race. I know it seems like, well, that seems like it's a black and white issue. We can look at race and just figure it out like that, maybe. But that's not the truth. That that has never worked. This country's not supposed to be about discriminating against age, race, gender, religion, and so on and so forth. We're not supposed to discriminate against any of those things, right? So even though it might seem easy and it's like, oh, well, to fix an evil, you got to use an evil or something. No. Two wrongs don't make a right, remember? So the way to fix it is to not look at that, even though it seems so black and white. Like, hey, we're not two different brown groups. In India, they have the caste system, and that's two different brown people looking at each other, And so it's not as easy to see the black and white necessarily in the skin color regard like that, right? But we need to look at the underlying factors of it. You can just go into a neighborhood and you don't even have to, we could clear out all the neighborhoods and you can walk into that neighborhood, and a lot of times you can determine probably what color of people live there, but you're not always right. You know what I mean? Sometimes that might be a white neighborhood or a Mexican neighborhood or whatever. It might not always be a black neighborhood that, quote unquote black neighborhood or something that's really bad, but oftentimes it is. So I don't want to say that's just a coincidence, but it's very coincidental, and for obvious reasons. So why don't we just go into those neighborhoods that are bad, regardless of color? Because if you do it just based on color, you're going to not take care of predominantly Mexican neighborhoods, for instance, that need help too, that aren't getting good funding, that don't have good programs nearby that kids can get involved with so that they have something better to do besides go, whatever exaggeration extreme you want to take it to, which I grew up in a town where there was a lot of that. There was a lot of that. The town I grew up in the southern half of California, I'll say, I got a taste of a lot of it. You know what I mean? There's bad white areas in that town, and I mean bad. Bad, bad. Like when I went to go rent an apartment one time, and I was first going to rent an apartment, I was very limited in what kind of places would be willing to take me in. And one of the places I remember, it was like the door was like falling off the hinges. You walk past all these people that you just, be careful. You might not really want to look them in the eye, even though I got a little bit of street cred on me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not exactly the biggest pushover you've ever seen. So it's like, I'm not walking in there with a suit and tie kind of thing or anything like that. It's like, I, I've rolled with some people that, are pretty tough or whatever you want to call it. Like, but I still am not wanting to look these people in the eye. Like I said, the door's falling off the hinges. You walk in the apartment, the walls are freaking spray painted with graffiti in the apartment. They don't even bother to whitewash them. You know what I mean? That's one of the images, one of the many images, many images in that town, that stuck out to me of just like, wow, this is how they expect you to live. And that apartment wasn't that much cheaper than something that was across town and relatively nicer place where you think like, oh, okay, I could possibly have a kid here and not be, afraid of my life or at least losing my property every single day, and not really obviously hanging out with people that are like collecting a check, and living off the system and slinging drugs and stuff. And that's just, that was a white neighborhood. That was a purely white area. And I've seen the same thing. I've kicked it in one of my friends at around just out of high school, moved into a similar kind of area that was predominantly Mexican like that. And, it was just a rough place where we felt like, I don't know, like if it was me and some homeboys and stuff, like, I don't think we were too worried about anything in any part of town at whatever, that kind of a thing. But, it's like whatever. You're like a soldier, like you look at it like if it's your time to go, it's your time to go or whatever. But that's not the way people should have to live. That's not, I mean, just think of like a kid growing up in that area. And kids do all the time, like, and they turn out there's all sorts of kids. You'll find engineers at Google that grew up in an area like that, all the way to people that are, I don't know. I don't know how to describe. I mean, you can just go find lifers on death row, of course, that are, grew up in that type of environment and stuff. So why not go into those neighborhoods and do something about it? You're never going to cure the problem. Don't try and cure the problem. Stop trying to take advantage of these populations. It's total freaking manipulation. We know there's a welfare state that needs people on welfare. It's just like I'm not trying to slam churches or whatever, but I know there's a lot of corrupt religious organizations out there, and they uh, a religious organization needs a congregation, and that you could look at it, and I look at the word religion maybe in the sense I'm trying to use it more loosely, not picking on any theological religion per se necessarily, but uh, just a religion they need that daily practice in the sense of that definition. Like they need people who need them, you know. So I think if it's people on food stamps or welfare or whatever, that system needs people. And I know for some people it's hard to think that a system like that, there's like a sort of a profitability factor to it. I wouldn't call it profit per se necessarily, but it's just like the highway funds maybe. Like if the highway, at least in California, I know the way the budget was working, I would ask my mom like, "Hey, why do they keep tearing up the same road?" Because we lived just out of town for a lot of years, and they would just constantly tear up this portion of the road, like a mile stretch of the road, like almost every year. And it's like, well, they just ripped that road up, like, and now they're pinning it all back down again. Like, why do they keep doing that? Why is there always like the same? They can't be running fiber like every single year. They can't be putting in a median every single year. And she said, well, what they're doing is they're blowing out the rest of their budget because, and I don't know absolute for fact that this is what was going on, but it seemed to make a lot of sense that they needed to use up their budget so that they could justify getting an equal or greater budget the next year. And that portion of the road that was just out of town was like a perfect candidate apparently because they could close off one lane, leave the other open, have all their stuff out there. It was just like a religious thing, and I'm using religion different now, the word religious obviously, but for them it was that reoccurring practice that they would do to do that. And so I would have to think that there could be similar stuff with like food stamps and welfare stuff like that. Like if they're going to get a federal aid or whatever, maybe that they have to sit to show that they needed whatever amount or whatever factors they show. I'm not even going to get into that, but so that creates this necessity. I've stayed at homeless shelters and or well, a homeless shelter. I've been to more than one homeless shelter, but I only stayed at one particular homeless shelter several times. And I noticed there that like nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, a few people would get off their feet, and it did. And the last time I stayed there, it helped me get off my feet. But most of the people I felt like weren't getting on the right track that were there. And at this homeless shelter, they had like a TV room. They had TV rooms plural. And I remember I would go in like study programming and stuff, and I'd be sitting in there, and then next thing you know, somebody's got like Jeopardy or cartoons or something on full blast, and they're fighting over the remote and stuff like that. And I was just like, wow, there's no study room here. There is no room where I can go and study. And coincidentally, I even enrolled in college one of the times that I was there. I think it was like the second to last time I stayed there because the economy was real bad at that time during the Obama years. And which I'd always felt like whenever those times would happen, I was like, oh, I'm so glad it's a Democratic president because I don't know what I'd do if it was a Republican president. I wouldn't be getting my unemployment or whatever. And now I have to look back and go, wait a minute. Maybe that was a little bit of a manufactured type of situation. But anyway, that's purely speculation, right? Um, so I enrolled in college, and I even had talked to the people, one of the people who was there, a staff member who was handling my case, and she was speaking with the director personally about my case, and the director knew me fairly personally, I mean, I knew them through there, but you end up with close to these people, to some of them. It's a really nice. The positive aspects of staying at a homeless shelter is very communal and very nice, but very socialized too. So I saw the benefits of a very socialist kind of a setting, and it's not something that I wanted to stay in forever. I did for the communal, cultural people aspect of it, but as far as the administrative socialization of it, that was all bad. You know what I mean? And that's the problem with the socialism, communism kind of thing, is, or whatever you want to call it, is the people in power, and you don't get control over who's in power at all. And so that alone makes you want to get out of there ASAP. It's better than surviving like a cold winter in Oregon, I would say, most times, or at least in my past experience it was. But there was a lot of times where I spent a lot of time homeless, or so I would call it houseless, because I felt like I had a home a lot of the times, even if I was living in a tent or whatever. But oftentimes, as often as not, I preferred to go stay in the tent, especially if the weather wasn't extreme at all. It was definitely like most times without a doubt. I held a job living out of a tent multiple times. I remember one time I would get, profiled by the police a fair amount by just doing that. And one time a police officer had pulled me over on my bike when I was on my way home from work at night, and he's like, where are you going? What are you doing? And that whole thing, which I think sometimes I'll tell people, it's none of your business. And I've had to do that. I've had police officers pull me over and want to search me multiple times and tell me I look like some suspect and that kind of stuff as a white person. And I've had to stand up for my rights and be like, and I don't look at it like I'm just standing up for my rights. I look at it like I'm standing up for everybody's rights. And I would say no most times. No, you're not going to search me. And I would say, if you feel like you have probable cause, I'm not trying to stop you or impede that in any sort of way, resist that in any sort of way. But if I have a choice in the matter, the answer is no. And every time they, always want to just, if they're talking about searching you, they're not just going to let it go at one question. It's always asked multiple times and everything. And to the point where I have to be adamant about it. But I would say most times that I was adamant about it, it ended up not going down in a search. One time it did end up, my vehicle was searched, and it sucked because I had helped a friend, and I'm not making this up. I have no reason to lie right now. If this wasn't true, I could just say it, and say that it's not true, big deal, whatever. But I'd literally helped a friend move. It was my fault for being stupid. It was down the street. I mean, not down the street. It was like down a highway, but literally like walking distance. If you're not scared of like a medium-sized walk or something. And I'd help them move. Well, they had probably 2/3 bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey, and I thought, this is one of their things. Then, alcohol's not free or whatever, so I'll just throw it behind the seat, drive it down to their house, and unload it with the rest of the stuff. Well, sure enough, I forgot that there was a bottle of Jack Daniel's with all the other stuff that I had to unload out of my truck at their house, and they did too. And so a month or two goes by. It's been so long, it could have been more than a month or two. But apparently I've been driving around with that bottle of freaking whiskey behind my seat that I totally forgot about. And I get pulled over and I get searched. And they pull that bottle out, and I was like, but my breath didn't smell like alcohol. I could have passed a breathalyzer like with 0% alcohol in my system and everything. But that was, I remember that time. Because that, and then I had a guitar in the back, in a guitar case, like a hard shell guitar case, not a super one of those flimsy hard shell guitar cases like the really cheap ones. And they searched that too, and they didn't bother buckling the buckles on it. So when I went to pull the guitar out of the back of the truck, that swung open, and I thought, how rude, like, if you're going to invade somebody's personal space, button it back up, I feel like, but that's the least of it. I know there's a lot of people out there I've seen that have had their stuff ransacked, And one time when I was living out of my car, I wasn't living out of my car that time, but one time when I was living out of my car up here in Oregon, that was California. When I was living in my car up here in Oregon, I was pulled over and told that, they wanted to search my vehicle because they were worried that I had bombs under my seat. I was like, wow, are you kidding me? I was like, you got to come up with something more realistic than that. I didn't say it like that, of course. I was like, no, you're not freaking searching my car. I don't think he really thought I had bombs under there, but he's just like, I was like, why do you want to search my car? He's like, oh, just to make sure, you don't have any bombs or anything under there. It's like, oh, really? What's that supposed to mean? But I was like, screw this, you know what I mean? I had seen other people have their stuff searched. I'd had my stuff searched, before, and I've lived out of my car, so if you could imagine, I had a trunk packed full of like clothes and stuff. I had my back seat with like whatever bedding material, just all my junk was in my car. I think I might have had a storage unit. I don't remember at that time. I had a storage unit for a lot of the time I was homeless. I managed to keep that and a cell phone for a lot of the time, which I was really surprised about because I couldn't even keep a cell phone when I had a house. But I guess I had enough extra cash, and I was on unemployment for a lot of it. I'd never collected unemployment in my life. And then right before I really started going homeless, I realized what unemployment was and that I qualified, and I qualified for a lot of it, and the Obama administration kept extending it. So I definitely, by going homeless, I was able to survive off a lot of that money. But I was vegan too, so I basically had to use food stamps and the unemployment money to eat adequately. So it wasn't like I had a bunch of extra dough. But it's a trip though. I even lived under a bridge for a little bit, and if you have any money at all, you feel wealthy because it's not earmarked for like bills and stuff. It's like that's your money, but usually it's going to food most times in those kinds of situations. At least for me, because there are a lot of places if you work the system where you can go get food and stuff like that if you're not a vegan, but I was able to successfully stay vegan like the entire time, and that's not easy to do. So there was a lot of starving and stuff like that in between because you just don't have money, and you can only eat so much iceberg lettuce and tomatoes and stuff before your body just rejects it and you'll just get a headache. So it's just better not to eat, in all honesty. But I've been through it, I've had myself broken down. I'm not really in that state anymore, but to where you have to go, okay, I'm going to turn into one of those skinny ass homeless people that doesn't have much muscle. You're like skin and bones, and you just you're not a muscle machine or anything, and I was somebody who liked to try and stay fit and stuff like that, and I had to accept that reality that now I was going to be like a weak, relatively weak homeless person, and that took a lot for my body to like kick back out of that mode. And you can definitely feel the toll that it took. That's like there's like a lifelong toll that will antagonize you, I think, there, and never go away from that type of a thing. But I was strong for being skin and bones. I definitely had a lot of strength, as much strength as I think you could humanly muster like that, because you walk around like that. You walk around with a backpack on all the time, and it's freaking usually loaded with stuff all the time. And I would ride a bike. I would often have a bike half or more of the time that I was homeless, and so I would spend most of the day on that bike. And one time I had it calculated that at one particular year or whatever, maybe not across the span of the whole year, but I would spend more time standing up pedaling on that bike than I did doing anything else throughout the whole day. I was very fit at that time. That was still when I was above the waterline. It wasn't until the later years that I got in that really skinny homeless person mode. But anyway, thanks for listening to my story on all that junk. I guess that's just to say, like, I've been around a block or two. It's not like I'm somebody speaking out of my ivory tower that can't relate to any sort of like oppression or anything like that. And I've stuck to my values politically and whatever, religiously, theologically, whatever. I've stuck to all my values through all that stuff. And I've put up with harassment from different people, yeah, some harassment from authority and stuff like that. And and I only shared a fraction of the stories, like a small fraction of the stories and stuff like that. Some of it's even hard to remember. I have a lot of it blocked out and stuff like that because, it's not always the easiest things to sit there and reflect on day in and day out like that. But I'm thankful for what I do have. Thank Yahweh Yeshua, the God of the Bible, whose name has been hidden behind all those capital letters that you see in there. I definitely, I know that there is a God and that is the God. Yahweh is the God, is the Almighty, and Yahweh Yeshua is that unique Son that came and gave his life as the ultimate sacrifice for us, and did so because Yahweh didn't want anything to do with us anymore, because we were nasty, and his unique Son came and paid the ultimate price so that we could continue with that grace. And that is the story of the Bible. That is that major narrative in there. And I don't think, that's what I think anyway. I think a lot of people think it's different, but if you really look and read what's going on there, that seems to be what I'm getting out of it. And we're not supposed to, if you believe in that stuff, you're not supposed to be idolatrous. So carrying around those crosses, especially if they have a body hanging from it, is not cool. There's nothing that says that, check yourself on that. You really gotta lay down those idols, bury them, forget about them. You know what I mean? These groups have you dragging that around. They tell you you're saved by the wood of that cross. Bullshit. You're saved by the resurrection, not by the wood of no fucking cross. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. And all lives matter. Every single one of them. Born, unborn, every color. And I don't even want to say all lives. That's become a whole banner of its own. It's like, might as well be a political front too. But every single person matters, is what I'm saying. Even these people who don't realize that it's like, they're doing something apparently. They claim they're a white organization. And it's like, then you need to be diverse. Like, how can you be in tech and be a white organization, an all-white organization? That to me says that that's your racism. They're like openly basically admitting that they're racist. So this could be argued, if you really want to get extreme, that these people are white supremacists, this No.js group. And it's like, what, so they can virtue signal with this, their whole our commitment thing? Why don't you make this commitment a long time ago? Why'd it have to be freaking a trending hashtag on Twitter for this to be a commitment of yours? You know what I mean? It's not difficult in Silicon Valley to have a disproportionate amount of Asians or Indians or something working for you. Not that that's wrong or right, but I'm saying it's very easily not to be a strictly white organization. I don't know for sure that these people are out of Silicon Valley or anything. Do they even say where they're from? They're probably not, I'll just say. I don't see how they could be like a solid white organization like that. But yet, where are they saying that, what about Asian people and stuff, I don't get it. What about all the people? Like, why don't they have some Asians in there? Why don't they have Indians in there? Whatever. I'm over all this stupid quote unquote left wing crap. You know what I mean? And this is coming from somebody who, I'll just say it, for the last 25 years I identified as a solid lefty. Like the Democrats were too middle of the road for my ass. Like they're fake ass Capitol Hill people. You know what I mean? Like I've been Che, Castro, idolizing, for lack of a better term. Not necessarily idolizing, but I've looked into those guys, and how they did things and been an admirer of them and stuff like that. Like I come from motherfucking leftist motherfucking roots, all right? So don't think that I'm some pushover, but you know what I am now? I'm a born again motherfucking conservative because I'm not falling for all this stupid ass bullshit. You know what I mean? And plus now I've gotten to know some stuff about like Che and Castro that has let my knowledge about them come full circle. You know, I heard the original bullshit CIA propaganda on them and all that crap like everybody else initially. Then I dug under the surface a little bit and found out a lot of the positives that those guys did and, you know, that whole thing. And if you want a little surface scratch on it, you can watch Michael Moore's stuff, of course. But there's a lot more to it than that, you know. All these are big, giant political systems. They're people, privileged people from specific families and groups put in power to do things. There's none of this shit is grassroots. None of it. Especially not Black Lives Matter. This shit ain't grassroots. So don't even think so. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of the African groups that you could argue some of them were responsible for selling black people as slaves and all sorts of exploitation, um, are the ones that are behind a lot of these groups. You know, and this comes back around to the eugenicists being behind a lot of the groups. You know, and I'm just saying my opinion on it. You know, do your own homework and let me know what you come back with, what facts you come back with. But these people are, you know, look who's behind like the Black Panthers in Africa and all that whole thing. You know, look, even the movie Black Panther. Look at the black magic behind that freaking movie. That movie has a theological agenda that's very, you know, you almost want to say undertone, but that's an understatement. There's a very theological overtone to that movie about what's going on there. And if you are a Bible believer, that's a satanic movie. Hate to say it, you know, and then they're riding on that whole Black Panther thing, pumping that thing up, which guess what? That's right around the corner. And the Black Panthers this time, they're not happy. You know, they came in that first time and there was a lot of cool stuff going on with the original Black Panthers, but then that the influences started creeping up, those African influences, and I mean literally African influences. I'm not talking about like whatever, don't try and construe that in any stupid freaking way. Give me a fucking break. But it's basically what it comes down to is it doesn't matter if it's African or Chinese or the North Pole or whatever you want to think of it as. There's other countries that want to do power grabs on this country, and they're using our political climates. That's the climate problem right there, is the manipulation of political climates to do these power grabs and these kinds of things, you know. So it's ridiculous, and that's the way it is with most of this stuff. You know, if you don't have to dig too far to see, there are a lot of foreign entities that are pumping money in. And these people, they want to tell you, like, speaking of Trump, like, that, oh, Trump, this and that, in bed with Russia? Fucking idiots. No, he's not, for one thing. I mean, if he is, it's no more than your next door neighbors or anybody like that, you know, no more than yourself, than anything you've ever done to promote, you know, playing Tetris or something like that, promoting Russia. But if you look at the people who are making those claims, where are they at? Where are they at? Do me a favor for the next week or two. Every time you hear a Democrat, and I'm normally not like a straight ticket talker, but this is another thing where it's just like just how the slavery thing with black and white, whatever, it happens to line up a lot of times with Democrats versus the right. I'll say the Republicans. I'm not a Republican. Um, but what's going on with the quote unquote Democrats right now is every time they accuse somebody on the other side of the aisle of something, they're guilty of it themselves. That Democrat is guilty of it, guaranteed. I mean, I've been blown away. This whole 2020, I haven't watched it before. I can't say anything about, you know, past administrations and all that kind of stuff, you know. But if you look at like Capitol Hill, especially, and all the Democrats there, look at any accusation they make across the aisle at anybody, and then dig into them on that. And I think you might find the results surprising. Thanks a lot for listening.